and then we're going to talk about some key expense changes that we have from the prior year, and talk a little bit about the current inflation rate and how that affects our budget. We're then going to go into our departmental budgets, including those areas that you see there tonight. And then we're doing a little deeper dive into transportation because we have an increased transportation cost this year, and we want to make sure that the board has an understanding of that current increase. So I'm going to turn it over to Frank so that he can do his spiel here.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I can take off. Yep. Okay, so the first slide here is a repeat of what I showed last time during our revenue presentation. So there's no change. The proposed budget right now, you can see it's a 3.98% total budget, which includes 3.96 increase in revenue, and our property tax cap is 2.37%. That's the maximum allowed under the tax cap formula. So that's what's being proposed here. As well as you see the other key indicator here is our state aid, which is up about 6.5%. So that brings our total budget up just under 4%. To $129.7 million. Now this slide here, the next one, it shows, I wanted to show a little bit of where that money is going on the year-over-year increase. So you see that $4.7 million that I referenced, that's our revenue increase year-over-year. When you take a look at our key expenses that have changed, this is just the change from this current fiscal year to what's proposed for next year. You can see transportation's at the top, contract transportation specifically. It's $1.6 million. Our health insurance went up about 12 to 13%, depending on which plan it is, but it's around 12 to 13%. It's 1.3 million. That's what that means to us. Teachers' retirement system rate came out, and that's also going up $500,000. And then our debt service, due to the bond, is up just under $1 million, which we are receiving aid. You saw our state aid is going up, but our debt service is also going up along with it. So the subtotal there, just those four areas, is about $4.4 million. So that right there, you can see it leaves you with $400,000 for all of the other expenses, which really isn't enough to cover everything. The last slide before we get into the departmental budgets is something I touched on.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sitting here.
Yep.
No, we didn't get that previous slide. We didn't get it.
Oh, must be missing a page in the printout?
Yeah. Maybe we start with that.
Okay, we'll make sure you get copies. I don't know if anybody wants to make copies quickly.
I have a new copy here.
Okay. I have a copy as well, if you want to look along. It's got my notes on it, but
Just that one page was missing?
That's the only, if that's the only page that's been shown so far, yeah, that's it.
So it's just, she's going to make copies of that page for you. Sure.
do you want me to go back to the previous slide, Heather? Or?
Oh, that's okay.
Sure, okay. Okay, so this is a follow-up from last meeting as well. The inflation rate was running just over 7%. New numbers came out. We're actually trending up. So you can see this is the actual month-over-month inflation that we've seen over the past 12 months, and it's a scary number. So we're up to 7.5%, which on our budget is, it's close to $10 million, which really means that that's purchasing power you're losing out of your budget. The tax cap is capped at 2%, we know. So even if subtracting that, you're talking a loss of several $1 million that we're going to have to offset. And if this continues, it's going to create problems down the road that we just need to be aware of. So the first departmental slide here is central office. Now you're going to see a common theme because of the what I just referenced with those main key expense categories, almost everything that can be held flat is being held flat because we have significant increases in those uncontrolled costs, such as the health insurance rate. So you can see here, central office across the board is being held flat. Same thing with the rest of the codes here. So everything from the district clerk's codes to the superintendent's codes, all the conferences, supplies, everything we're doing is being held 0% increase year over year. So I'm not going to go through each and every single line item, but I'll point out as we move along kind of the key increases. Okay, so business office, we had largely held flat. There's a few categories that are going up and some that are going down. So the staff development is going up by $2,000, and that's to provide Envision training so we can further continue our more precise budgeting. That's Envision training for the business office and also anyone who uses it within the district. So it'll be the personnel office and any people who put in requisitions as well. The decrease you'll see down at the bottom is internal and external auditors. So we went out and did an RFP this year. So we were able to reduce our contract costs on both of those lines. So that's why you see it's down a few $1,000s. So the next area is still in the business office is purchasing agent. Again, everything is being held flat. Our debt service fee, fiscal agent debt service, that is contractual. That's going up slightly just because we're having, because of the bond issuance that we have. So that's a contracted rate we have with our fiscal advisor. So you can see here the total business office expense is up about $6,000. It's 3%. Okay. Next, legal and personnel, same story. Everything's being held flat except we have slight increases advertising because we're trying to advertise for more drivers. So we're putting in some more driver ads and also just general employment ads. So that's bumped up $3,000. But largely, you can see on the next slide, the whole entire legal personnel department is going up about $8,000. So it's 2%, but it's in terms of materiality, it's not a significant portion of the budget.
So,
Yeah.
we're missing a bunch of things.
It's every other page we're missing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Veronica, if you could print out copies.
Yeah, I'll take care of it.
Yeah. I'm gonna email it.
Okay, so other administrative here. So you'll see there's a few variations here. So the big one, umbrella insurance, that it looks like it's going down by about $50,000. It's just simply the expense is being transferred to a transportation code. So that's not really necessarily going down $50,000. It's just being moved to another code. Our liability insurance is going up slightly. Again, that's a contracted rate that it's just a slight bump up from the prior year. But everything else discretionary that we can hold steady is being held steady. And the admin BOCES services, that's the rate we get from Western Suffolk BOCES. And that's going up slightly because they're, again, facing some of the same cost increases that we are. So in total, the line item budget shows that it's down $36,000, but again, it's really being held flat to slightly up because of the increases in the admin BOCES and our insurance. Okay, so facility.
Frank, what
Yes.
line are we transferring the insurance to?
It's going into a transportation code, so it's lumped in the transportation, which is I'll show in a couple slides.
Okay. Thanks.
It's related to transportation, so that's why we just moved it over.
I'm fine with that. That's just wondering.
Yep. So the key additions here. So you'll see facilities. Apologize, there's a lot of numbers on here. There's no real clear way to kind of break it, so I just wanted to include everything. So facilities is going up. I put some of the key additions up on the right. So we're in need of a new maintenance van and the auto scrubber. So you see the big equipment repair, the $30,000. That's we have 5 auto scrubbers for the schools that need to be repaired. And the big thing here is it's really outside of our control, but it's just energy prices. So gas prices, oil prices are up significantly, and they're expected to be up again next year. So you see some of the biggest ones on there is the gas bill, which we bumped up about $75,000. So that brings the total, we're going from about 2.6 million to 2.9, so it's about a $250,000 increase in facilities. On the ground side, it's going down. It's just a slight reduction in equipment, which is causing that. So it's down about 4% because we just didn't need as much equipment this year. So that brings the total grounds plus facilities. It's about $240,000 increase, so it's up 8%. This is probably the area where we increase the budget the most outside of transportation, just because we have some needs that just well, if we don't fix them, will cause costs in excess of what we're proposing here. Okay, security is also being held largely flat. It's a slight tick up in equipment just because of the new, we need a new piece for the new badges that we're getting for the door project. Other than that, it's being held flat. There's slight increase in uniform needs, but it's only $250. Okay, so the big one, as we talked about, is transportation. So I'm going to spend a good amount of time on this slide, and then I have the next few slides are going to go really kind of give a deep dive into transportation to kind of show how we've gotten here and kind of what some recommendations might be. So you see the bottom line is probably the most important one to look at. You see, as Glenn mentioned earlier, it's a little over $1.6 million transportation increase. So almost all of that entirely, you have to look 2 lines up, it's contractual services. So that's our contract transportation, which we're expecting we're going to need at least a $1.6 million increase. The garage codes were actually going down a little bit. And if you look at all the other transportation codes above it, the reason why that's going up is largely, you can see it's diesel fuel and gasoline. Because like I said, as I'm sure everybody's seen, the gas prices have gone up a lot. So stripping out the gasoline, the transportation budget is flat. The only difference is that contract transportation line. So I'm going to go into now kind of why that's the case. And if you can recall from the last presentation, I think I gave some early numbers on like the difference between the contracts that we have. It's about $50,000 increase per route on the new contract versus the old one.
Do we have an approximate run rate for this year? Like 2.1 to 3.7?
What our costs are going to come in this year?
Yeah.
I have it. I don't have the number on the top of my head, but I can email you the number. It's coming in. It's coming in above what we have budgeted. So we're going to have to, because we signed the contract after I made the budget. So when we did this budget last year, it was increased quite a bit. So I think I put it up 30%. I thought maybe 30% the contract would go up from contract to contract. Went up way more than that, which really is not normal. So we're going to run short this year. And then next year, we're budgeting to try to get to that new level that we're at. It shouldn't go up materially each year from there on. It's just that big bump up on the contract. So contract transportation, so how did we get here? So essentially, it starts at the top right, the loss of drivers. So we've seen an overall reduction in drivers. Some people have retired, some people have resigned. And because of the environment that we're in, unemployment levels are extremely low. It's difficult to attract new drivers. We see it not only in transportation, but also in other areas. But it's most significant in terms of what it's doing financially to our budget in transportation. So with those loss of drivers, most of our routes, we don't have an option not to provide. So they're mandatory routes, so we have to fill them. And what happens is all of those routes that are getting filled, they're going through a contract. And because we have a contract that's, it's a brand new one, so it's reflective of pandemic, low driver numbers, and all of the costs associated with it, where it's constraining us financially. So that's kind of the cycle that we're in. And each driver we lose, where it's one more route going from in-house to outside. Okay, so the next slide you can see, this is the actual data. So we've gone from, I plotted it back to 15, 16, so we had 79 drivers, and in this current year, we have 47. So it's down and to the right, which is not what you want. It's a loss of about 41%. So the next slide should also not come as a surprise then, because it's the direct inverse. So you can see what I talked about in terms of that new contract coming in. That's our total transportation expenses. So in 15, 16, remember we had 79 drivers. We were at 4.6 million in transportation. For 2021, we were at 7.7 million. So that was last year. And then this year it's going to come in slightly higher. And you can see that big spike. You see it goes down, it dips down because of COVID. So we're slowly increasing as we're losing drivers, the cost. And then you see the big drop, that's COVID. And then here comes the new contract, it spikes up. And then you'll probably see a gradual increase from there as the contract goes up year over year. Okay, so some recommendations moving forward. So I put down kind of what I thought, would be the way to think about this and some things that could be done. So I think it's important to first establish what level of transportation does the district wish to maintain. So there's two ways to think about it. You can say to yourself, we must have these certain services, and we're going to budget everything else around it. Like we have to have these. Or you could say to yourself, we want to do whatever the percentage is, 5, 6, 7% of our budget on transportation, optimized for that. So it's kind of two fundamentally different ways to do it, because one caps it, one doesn't. So that's kind of a broader decision to be made as to which approach you want to take. And then once that's done, I think a formal plan should be developed to kind of achieve that goal. So what's the split of in-house versus contract transportation? It doesn't make sense to never have any contract. So there's a lot of instances where we have one kid on a bus who's going to a private school, say halfway across the island. We're always going to want to put that on a shared service contract. But for the most part, we want to try to, if you want to keep costs down, be more in-house. Some steps that are being proposed in the budget now is adjusting the start time. So Al has done a really good job of trying to move some things around in terms of splitting the elementary schools to see what kind of savings that would give us in terms of adjusting the start times. We were also looking at consolidating some of the late buses. We run a lot of late buses after school. Not eliminating, but just trying to consolidate them to the best we can to reduce some of those contract rates, because it's about, like I said, $100,000 a route. And then consideration of maybe an opt-out survey. So we know that our buses are not running at full capacity. We have to provide everybody within the limits transportation, but there are a lot of people not using it. So during the pandemic, a lot of districts did opt-out surveys. That might be something worth considering. I don't think it would be legally binding. We would let the people on the bus if they change their mind, but if we know people aren't going to use the bus, we don't necessarily have to reserve spots for them, potentially. And then the last is, any transportation investment. So there's a clear trend in what you've seen, in those numbers. So it's going to take some level of investment to kind of turn that around, in my opinion. So, and then from there, once that's done, it's really just an implementation of whatever plan is developed. It'll probably take a few years because we don't have slack in the budget, and when you're talking making significant changes and potentially investments, like it might take a few years to layer those things in. And then of course, we're just gonna have to monitor and report on how progress is going, and make changes as needed. So those are my recommendations. That's kind of all I had in terms of content. So I'm happy to go back to any slides if anyone on the board has questions. I know it was a lot of numbers, a lot of information, so we can go back through it as you'd like.
Frank, is it possible, I know in years past we would get comparison for maybe 3, 4, 5 years back, and each year what's been budgeted and the
Yeah.
actual expense? I don't know if that's possible, I'm sure the numbers are there.
Yeah, that's
If you
possible.
provide with that would be great.
Yep.
And then just to jump to transportation, you know, with all of these contractual services, does it make sense to be the most competitive as far as salary for bus drivers to attract people here? Because $100,000 for one route seems so excessive. It looks like almost half of the drivers are not employed here anymore. I don't know how competitive we are to surrounding areas.
Yeah, so Al and I know Dee have done a little bit of background research on, and that's something that we can provide the board, maybe just the town of Babylon, what people get paid. It's definitely an option to consider. I mean, so that would be up to the board, and then it's obviously a negotiated thing that you'd have to do, but that would fall under the level of transportation investments, yes. So it makes sense, in my opinion, financially, to try to get as many drivers in-house as we can, because we're paying the same amount for all the overhead, right? So you're paying the same for the bus garage, for all the buses, all that. So not fully utilizing it is just kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So a lot of districts have decided they want to go contract, and then others are in-house, but you don't want to be, we're kind of like right in the middle, which is probably the worst place to be. So we have all the fixed costs of having an in-house program, but we're really not running a lot of our stuff in-house. So we're getting really double hit with both, like the worst of both. So I think if the board wants to consider those investments, I think it's worthwhile. It'll ultimately save money in the long run. But yeah, it would be an investment to do that.
It kind of goes hand in hand. It was like the perfect storm where when the pandemic hit, and then bus companies were getting back, the private contracts were getting back on their feet, they were offering tremendous amount of money, signing bonuses, health insurance, all of those things that we weren't offering. So you could go get a $5,000 signing bonus, have a higher rate of pay, and get health insurance. So what happens is it drained, you know, anybody who was running in-house services at current salary rates or hourly rates, and we don't have the ability. So the transportation, the bus drivers and matrons are a part of a contract that has like 6 or 7 units in it that is negotiated together. And Dee and I have been meeting, we try to meet every month, and we've had some cancellations, but we've had a lot of conversation because she's been working very hard. She's the shop steward, she's here this evening. Do you want to wait? There she is. So Dee and I meet, and we have a lot of conversations about what other bus companies are doing, what districts are doing. We were looking at, you know, coming up with ideas to come to the board to discuss how do we grow our in-house program, because we all feel that the in-house program is the best avenue for our school district. It's a community-based program. We can have more employees here. I'd rather pay the employees here rather than paying a contract rate. So the idea would be, in this investment, there's going to be a year or so where you're not going to see the differential, right? You're going to have these contracts. We're going to start attracting and paying more, and then trying to get people in. So we can come up with some type of plan, and we'd have to reach out, of course, Dee as a union person, to see if they're interested in negotiating and doing a sidebar MOA because their contract is not up, or if their actual unit will allow a subunit to go out and negotiate on their own for just one section of the unit. We never got that far, Dee, to even talk about that. So I don't know if that's allowable in their unit, or if we have to go to the entire group that's there and begin our negotiation. So we can work on that. I think we're meeting Friday, actually, this week. So we can have a follow-up conversation.
It seems that it would make sense as soon as possible, you know, definitely for next year, to, you know, to kind of restructure that. Because it looks like the transportation has almost doubled in cost. That is a lot of money. If we can be competitive, right, in-house, it seems like where there might be even savings next year if we can attract people.
I think we've spoken about this for a couple of years.
It's been going on for a number of years.
We've spoken about this. We know one of the drivers is the salary, is the rate. You know, but what are the other drivers? I mean, because Not everybody leaves because of that, because otherwise we'd have nobody here.
Yeah, so,
So,
a lot of the, it's definitely salary
Yes.
and it's benefits. So it's health benefits, and they are getting those in private company, and we can look at benefits that maybe are affordable. So one of the things that when we had our luncheon this year, I was talking to somebody within their unit, the health benefit cost is becoming so expensive that it's almost unaffordable in the salary range that the people are making. So their monthly expenditure could be as high as $700 or $800, and it's coming out of a paycheck of a $1,400 paycheck or a $1,500 paycheck. So they're losing more than half of their income due to the rates of health insurance, because you have to negotiate a percentage. What percentage would a bus driver or matron pay in the health insurance? There are options. We use Empire and HIP are the two options because it's driven really by the teacher's unit, those options. Empire at now is close to $35,000 or $36,000 a year for a family plan. So if a driver's going to pay 20% of that, right, you're talking $7,000, almost $8,000 a year in their own personal cost, plus we're picking up the other $20,000, $25,000 per driver and increasing the salaries. And then if you go, there's going to be that balance of how many more drivers are we going to attract? So and this is really for negotiations, but if you offer that kind of package and the 47 people who are here take it, and we only gain 2 drivers because of it, because of the employment climate, we're going to be hit on both sides.
right.
You're going to have the exorbitant contractual expenses, and you increase the health insurance, the wage, which I believe our people, deserve. But if you don't attract the employees, because right now a lot of these jobs aren't being filled in the market in general, that you could run into a big issue.
And to touch on what Glenn says, it's not just us, everybody's having problems getting drivers.
But we're having more than some places because we're not as competitive. There are other districts paying much more than we get. We're the lowest in the adjoining
And now
areas.
one district that offers benefits is also now offering an increase in
So
salary.
basically, I know for a fact, because I had somebody that would have come back to us who left years ago and went to Sachem for the benefits, okay? She retired out and wanted to come back here because she started here. But because we start at $23.40, she chose to go to Deer Park and start at 27,
Which is on top of
which
that.
18 years, I'm here 18 years, and that's what I'm at.
Right.
So somebody coming back is not going to start way at the bottom, right? All these other districts are offering holidays.
We don't have any.
There are, now your contract company that you sub to, I got to speak to one of those contract drivers. He's making $33 an hour to do our work in our district. And it's actually a slap in our face every single day that this man
But
is
I just
making
wanna say, though,
$6 more an hour.
I want to just interject
No,
here,
no.
because I don't think this is really the place for this
No,
kind
no,
of
I was just
conversation.
trying
So
to
let me
explain
just.
why we're not getting drivers.
Well, I
because
understand
we're
that,
not
but I want to
offering
say that,
anything. That's the
remember
only
that
thing.
all salaries are negotiated at a table. And
Right.
that when we're at the table and we negotiate, it's fair bargaining.
Right.
And that at any time, when we were at the table, salaries could have been negotiated at different times in the unit. It's a very difficult group when negotiating, because it's a large group
Yes, I know.
of individual workers.
I do know that.
And Dee and I have been working on a lot of plans, and I think these conversations are great, and they are conversations that we've had already.
I understand, but the problem is, Glenn, honestly, all these years at contract negotiations, we were turned down for everything with given very minimal. And that's why you lost all your drivers. They went to places that were giving way more. We
I
lost
understand
people
that,
to-
and I understand that
Yeah.
that's your belief system. But we don't have data that says that that is the true reason why we lost our drivers. I know due to the pandemic that I saw when those rates were being offered, the salary and the benefits. And we have had conversations before at the negotiation tables that I've been at, in bringing in certain things for drivers, and they get counteracted by other units that are asking for other things in their contract because of the whole umbrella of negotiating. So I think it's important that, one, we find out if it's a part of, if we are able to and want to explore with drivers, and we're allowed to do that, because remember, they're in a unit that has, and I don't know, is it custodians?
Custodians, garage mechanics,
Custodians, so they're all in one union.
building and grounds,
And they're always,
maintenance.
we want to discuss with, like, you having done that part, like, that is something approachable. We could approach it with an MOA, that I am aware of, but I don't know all the intricate details. This is
Right.
still,
Yeah.
like, new.
Right.
This is like right now.
We've been talking about, well,
This is happening now.
yeah, we've been talking about it probably
We've been
since when the
talking about it,
pandemic.
We never got that deep.
Right.
You know what I mean? So.
And one thing I would suggest is kind of why I said to make it like a formalized plan, is that I think it's important to know what works and what doesn't. So honestly, like when I was in the private sector before this, I know it's different, there's no collective bargaining. Like I would do this for Uber, like in charge of getting drivers on. And one thing that we would do there, which is harder to do with collective bargaining, is you want to see what works. So what Glenn mentioned is like incrementality. So it's like if you increase the wages by 10% on the entire budget of drivers, you know, and then you get 2 drivers, it just costs you $500,000. You know, it could cost you, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars per driver. So I think you want to kind of do one thing at a time. So it's like not to say that drivers don't want the whole. I mean, I'm sure you want every single thing thrown at you right away. But I think it's important to say try to find out what works, and then we can establish that and document it for the district to know. So this is wages. Wages didn't work. What about health insurance? What about this? What about that? So you can see the cost per incremental improvement, and that could be learned from.
Typically, what is something in this discussion that would be something to start? Like, for instance, what would be something that would maybe engage more drivers, other than, pay or pay?
Well, I would say we could survey the drivers and survey some other districts and see get some data on it and see what other districts are making. We can ask our drivers what they feel is most important to them. So if I may think, my gut says it's salary, but the driver may come back and say no, 90% want health insurance, but I'm pretty sure it's probably salary. And I think that would say a lot. And then we can learn and have a discussion in terms of, because we have to cost it out. Like this budget doesn't have any slack in it, so you're talking a straight investment from savings to do any of this. So you want to make sure that we can at least
clarify that
document
because
it.
it went quick. What Frank's saying is any change to what we're presenting as a budget would take reserve money to be added to the budget. That there isn't any room built in this budget right now for negotiations or changing that salary, but it doesn't mean the board couldn't decide, if you wanted to use more reserve money to offset our expenditures.
So let's see, first of all, I think we need to talk to the drivers, see what's most important to them. We need to have the survey of what's going on around us.
And if they're able to fill their jobs. Because we're talking that they have these great salaries and these benefits, but are they able to fill all their jobs also? I would want to know what's your current rate of employment. We're 70% full employed, we're still, you know what I'm saying? I would want to know, Suffolk Transportation, what's your current fill rate and your employment, and educational, what's your fill rate, how many positions are you still seeking, Because if it's competition, or is it just lack of bodies to do the job?
Well, off the top of my head, it's both, right?
It's fine.
But I think the other thing, and I don't know how much data there would be, is reaching out to former drivers and see what was their impetus for leaving. They retired because the salary was low, it didn't make sense, or they retired because they wanted to go to Florida, or they went to Suffolk or Deer Park because of salary. And I think that could help drive what we think is the way to attract drivers, or help us figure out what would attract drivers. The other thing, if we're looking at taking reserves to do reoccurring expenses, we need to have some sort of plan to move that into general funds, right, into general budget. And so if we're going to take $1 million out of reserves, We can't do that this year, next year after. We have to say, okay, if that's what we're doing this year, next year, you know, we're gonna have $500,000 of that is gonna be covered by general expenses.
So-
You know, whatever that, I think we need to have that plan in order to.
Yeah, and that's
talk
what
about
Frank talks about here in a long-term,
Multi-year,
multi-year
yeah.
plan, that if the board wants us to, as an administrative team, begin this process of developing a plan that formalizes in-house transportation as the priority for the district, and you want us to begin to develop a multi-year plan of how to increase more in-house drivers, what would that look like? What would the finances be? We can work on that plan. So that would just be, if you'd like us to approach doing that, it's this time that we see, you know, the increase. Our bus contract before was just a rollover contract year after year with very little increase in our contract. It's why we have such a big spike in our contract costs this particular year.
Yeah, it was just shared services.
Right.
Yeah.
Now we're talking full, we're using them for a lot of our own routes. And and this type of plan, like it's a very difficult, it's an easy problem to identify and it's a hard problem to solve because you don't have a lot of room anywhere. So it really needs to be done right, or it could be problematic
We're
trying to
definitely dependent on
solve something.
moving that contract expense to in-house expense, and the difference is the savings that we have. I mean, Heather was talking about it before. That's up, you know, more than double.
You have to almost come up with a
Yeah.
plan of, you know, achieving budget agnostic shift of money. The 1.6 shifting over to in-house from contract, and that's a delicate way to balance that and figure out how to do that in a way that you don't have a spike of increased costs, like Frank says, about did this particular decision regarding raising salaries, you know, and that it's significant changes. So Dee and I have had this conversation. Our top salary is the starting salary for Suffolk Transportation. And we know that because we've seen the ads and we reviewed them together. So like that's a significant change for us. So we would have to cost that out. What would it cost just for our people, the 47 we have now? What would that salary cost be in that change? And that's without reducing any runs yet because we haven't brought in or attracted any new people. And then figure out, all right, if we get 4 more, we can reduce this much from contracted transportation and put it here, and then work out various scenarios regarding improving by 4, improving by 8, 12, 18 drivers in each scenario to see what that looks like.
Definitely. And I think the other things that you guys have up there for the operating efficiencies is definitely something we need to look at, right? Because we need some short-term help.
Yeah, so we're
Because
looking at
that'll
the
give us some
adjusting of the
savings.
elementary times,
Yeah.
doing an early and late run, two schools and 3 schools. Looking at condensing late buses. We have a lot of late buses that run, you know, especially at the middle school. We have like, there's the regular dismissal, there's the
3:10,
3:10, the
3:30, 4:30, 5:30.
it's too many. And so we have to kind of consolidate that and say, listen, we're going to offer this run and this run. And same at the high school, we're running late buses.
2:40, 3:30, 4:30, 5:30.
Correct.
Have we been keeping track
And 2
of
o'clock,
how
available.
many kids are actually on the bus? I know it's probably not an everyday thing.
Yes,
but-
we have.
Okay, great, awesome.
So we have those
Okay,
numbers.
and
No, 'cause that is
No,
super
really?
important, right?
Yeah.
and it's hit or miss any day. Any day could go from a couple of kids to 20, 25
So
kids.
say for
Yeah.
example,
There's
they have
no,
a,
there's no rhyme or reason.
Right.
there is, you just don't know it. So for
Yeah.
example, if they have Students for a Better World,
Right, yeah,
and there's
you wanna
220 kids and they
Yes.
all stay,
Right.
that late bus run is packed. But
Right.
on a non-meeting day, then it's your athletes,
Yeah.
that your underclassmen athletes that need rides home. So we can evaluate that because it's really based on bus passes that were handed out and kids coming on a bus. So we can look at that to make the consolidated recommendations. Like, hey, we can get rid of the X bus run at the high school. And those kids would have to be supervised and wait to the next bus
Because
run.
some of those late
Well,
buses are being
we can-
contracted right now.
Yes,
Not in-house.
right.
Yeah, we have 4, right? 4, right?
What?
Contract late buses. Is it 4? 5?
Right now, we have 4.
4. Yeah, so that's
Okay.
$400,000.
Right, yeah.
Right.
We can use
Right,
some of that
and-
money.
And if we
right?
do the split, we can take them back. If we do the split elementary, because Then instead of me having 32 buses running at 3 o'clock at that time when I need all the buses, I'll only have 16. So I'll have extra buses in the afternoon. That's my biggest problem is afternoons.
Yeah.
Okay?
And we are going to adjust the start times. I met with the elementary principals today about, we did it during our hybrid.
Yeah.
So looking at a similar 2-school, 3-school, 8:55, 9:25 start. So, and it really helps even with UPK because with 108 students coming to MGV, it would be good to have time where they're not all coming, that the regular age kids and the UPK kids are coming at the same time because it's too busy. So we'll make some recommendations when it comes to that as well.
It's definitely, you know, Matt and I were just talking, we definitely can use some of that savings if we do that adjusting of
It's
time.
some of that's already
So,
built in.
yeah, I was
there,
gonna
just
say,
so you
the
know.
start times are
That's
baked
built
into
in
this
already.
Already bake that in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's baked in already. And I had to, Al and I have been meeting on this for months to try to get the number down where I could even balance the budget.
That's awesome.
Those are baked in, so we've revised the routes several times already. What's not baked in is we could consider more consolidation of late buses. We could consider an opt-out survey. That's not baked in, but the start time is already.
So we'll go about developing a plan, working with the unit and present something to the board during this budget process so that before we go to setting a budget number, we have an idea of where we want to go. And I think it'll be important that in executive session that we speak about negotiations, you know, with the unit, and I'll get some information from our attorney regarding reaching out to see about an MOA with just drivers or matrons separately from the other unit.
Frank, when you're doing the back numbers, I know you said you could do a couple of years back. Could we also do the, how many contracted runs out we had annually for each year, up and down, like,
Yeah,
just to see how it went
I
up?
can give you that, but that's pretty basically, it has stayed the same. I mean, except like when you see I lost 4 people last year,
Yeah.
so that's 4 more people this year that I have to get out. The basis has stayed. What happened is we had a contract with education, okay, for our small bands. And we had the same contract since before I'd been here. It was a 20-year contract that we were just rolling over. And we had the best price on Long Island. Nobody could touch us for what we were getting. And then like Glenn said, when COVID hit, it fell apart. Educational, we were just like gravy to educational because they would throw us on their buses that they were going in the neighborhood. What they couldn't do, I would give to BOCES. And that's how I worked it out. Once that fell apart, then we had to get a contract. So last year we used BOCES all together, and then we put out a bid for a contract. Okay, only 2 companies answered that call for a contract. And they were almost identical, they ranked the contract. So
Yeah,
we
they
went
were.
with the better of the 2.
What
But
was
this
the
is
big
the prices
issue
we're now
throughout
at.
the island? Because I'm sure you saw at South Huntington where they were losing their buses mid-school year, and actually they were reaching out to local school districts to see if they could utilize some buses of surrounding districts because they were losing their contract altogether, that the bus company couldn't staff their buses.
There's only maybe 5 different major bus companies anymore left on Long Island anyway. Okay, all the little ones that we used to have, they're all gone. Okay, so there's not really a lot of competition. They've all become Amazons of bus companies, you know what I mean? They split up the area, they split up the island, and that's what they have. So there's not like a lot of choice that we have here as far as the contract.
It sounds like the 70s, the gas prices,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
the garbage and the buses, they're all under siege.
Yep.
Yeah, this is an insane amount
And
of
it's the
money to
same
pay
thing
outside.
that we went through this educationally and curriculum-wise with textbook companies. Because everything grew. There was Houghton Mifflin, there was Pearson, there was Macmillan, and they all conglomerated into one and became one company. And that happened just with some of the software used. Frontline took over, ASOP Online, Oasis, My Learning Plan. All of a sudden, they own them all now. Now you just sign into Frontline and you have access to all those programs. So what's happening is very similar with the buses. There were so many of these little companies, first educational, Suffolk, Montauk, that kind of, as these companies have gotten larger, they're able to take on these employees and offer better salaries and benefits and take on,
Well, they know that they have us cornered basically as a school district. They know that you gotta go to them. That's why they offer that salary and they
Market
attract the
value, yeah.
people, because they know that.
well, they
they're
just
gonna
pass
get-
it on
Yeah, they
to
pass
us.
it on.
Yeah,
It's only
they're gonna
passed on
pass it
to
down
us.
to us, that's what I'm saying.
That's why we gotta bring it back.
Yep.
Yeah, bringing it back is the best way. Ain't gonna be an easy way, but it's the best way.
Correct, yeah, and I think the plan, I'm happy to draft one out. I think it's gonna be a multi-year plan. Like, there'll be suggestions for this coming year, but I don't believe that even if you were to do something this year, that you're gonna have any kind of real significance next year. Like, so, it's not, I don't suspect that you're gonna have all of a sudden 15 drivers show up ready to apply. That would be a material impact, like that would bring down our contract transportation right away. I just wouldn't bet on that, is what I'm saying. So like, it's gonna be a little difficult to kind of predict what's gonna happen. So but that'll all be in the plan, and we'll come up with some expectations, and there's gonna have to be a scenario of, okay, what happens if we do this? Here's what it's gonna cost. What if we don't get the drivers that we think we're gonna get? So that there has to be, that plan will be in there, but then all of a sudden you're going to have another thing that we're going to have to deal with, so we want to try to
And
plan for that beforehand, which will be in
that
there.
plan also, we have to figure out about renewing the stock, because we haven't done that for a couple of years. As far as getting new buses and everything, which is a cost. That would have to be in that plan also, if we're gonna do this to increase our people. We have to have a plan for renewing the stock every year.
Yeah.
Which we talked about, that leasing plan, we were in, that is, we did put some buses into the federal stimulus funds.
Yeah, we have 5. Yeah.
5, so.
Yeah. And that's not a problem. If we have the driver numbers, getting the buses is an easy, worthwhile investment.
And eatable, so.
Right. So Al and I did the numbers earlier. It's about the cost of a driver on average is about with the payroll taxes and retirement benefit contributions about $33,000 versus $100,000 for contract route. I mean, it doesn't include the cost of the fuel, cost of the bus, all that, but like with that margin there, there's plenty of room to absorb any incremental increases you needed for buses and maintenance and that kind of stuff. So, okay. Okay, so any other questions on transportation or any of the other slides? No? Okay.
Good job. That's it, yep.
Oh,
That's it for tonight, yeah. That was the only portion for tonight, yep.
I don't need a motion to that.
No, because it's not a regular business meeting.
Any board members have any additional questions?
And you test. Arrival test. We've spoken about it before, and I said that it was going to be in the transportation budget presentation. So.
Have a good night,
All right, have a nice night.